varies, but before that it gets very murky. So I want to begin with the age of Pisces here. And what does the age of Pisces mean? What significance did this have in culture? We have to look at a few things, and the first thing we have to decide is when did it begin? So for instance, most astrologers, not all, most astrologers would say that the age of Pisces began around the birth of Christ. Give or take a few hundred years on either side. Some disagree with that, like Rudolf Steiner, but in general, most believe that that started around the time of Christ. And you see an extraordinary confluence of symbols associated with Pisces in terms of Christianity. The reason I picked Christianity, you see, when an age begins, it affects the whole world. It's not just one culture. However, like that William Gibson line that I started with, the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. So in other words, you have the influence of the ages all over, but it's primarily in a certain area. Another example of that, because this is true of all astrology really, like the events of 9/11 and the Twin Towers, for instance. Now, most astrologers will tend to agree that was primarily the result of Saturn opposing Pluto in 2001. Now, I talked to a skeptic once, and he said, well, why didn't that aspect affect the entire planet? Well, it did, but it was concentrated primarily in Manhattan. All aspects, like when the Watergate scandal happened, it happened primarily in Washington. Things like that. These aspects tend to converge in a certain spot. And Christianity isn't the only place that the Piscean age influence manifested, but it was probably the most obvious. So you have the fish symbolism, ichthys. And so I remember reading a skeptical comment about how the Piscean symbolism was one fish, not two fish like Pisces, which isn't true. You do have examples in early Christianity of the double fish, like in the sign of Pisces. That's off of the stained glass window in Chartres Cathedral. Walking on water, that's a classic. Pisces is a water sign, the notion of rising above the water. Turning of water into wine. Wine is a Neptunian Piscean symbol. The charity, the helping of the dispossessed, the outcasts of society, that's also a very Piscean sort of thing. Washing of feet. The feet are the part of the body that is ruled by Pisces. Baptism, again, another water symbol associated with Pisces, purification by water. Now, the question arises, were these correspondences to the age of Pisces in Christianity intentional or not? And there's three possible explanations for that. One is that, yes, they were fully aware of the astrological notion of the great ages. This is very controversial because academics, mainstream academics, believe, no, we knew of precession of the equinox going back to Hipparchus around 127 BC, but that wasn't coupled, according to the academics, with the notion of the astrological ages till much later, maybe the 1790s and the 1800s. There's a lot of controversy about that. You have a lot of independent scholars like David Ulansey, who believes that the Mithraic mysteries show an understanding of the astrological ages. You've got Graham Hancock. You've got the book Hamlet's Mill by Hertha von Deckend and Giorgio de Santillana, who claim that it goes back thousands and thousands of years. I'm not here to debate that. It's just I'm making you aware that there's controversy about this. The other possible thing here with that is, no, they weren't aware of it. The church fathers weren't aware of it, but that didn't matter because the effect could still occur since astrological influence doesn't require conscious knowledge of it to work. In other words, astrology works whether you believe it or not. For instance, one of the things that people like Swaller de Lubitsch and John Anthony West talk about is that if you go look into ancient Egypt, you see a shift in the iconography of ancient Egypt around the time that it shifted from the age of Taurus to the age of Aries. You saw a shift from bull symbolism to ram symbolism with the New Kingdom, for example. Now, no mainstream academic will tell you that the ancient Egyptians understood the astrological ages like we do. Again, that's the debatable point. But it doesn't matter whether the Egyptians understood it if you believe in astrology and whether it has an influence on you, or whether you believe in it or not. If you have a Mars squaring your moon, it's going to affect you. Whether, if just 2 days of the month, Kriyananda made a funny comment once. I thought it was funny. He said, Goswami Kriyananda from the city who I studied with. He said that if someone doesn't believe in astrology, just tell them when Mars is squaring their moon, and they'll realize how powerful astrology is. No matter how balanced you think you are, you're going to be irritable for 2 days. Third thing here is the church fathers didn't base their Piscean symbolism on the great ages at all, or precession. They based it on the fact that in 7 BC there was a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in the sign of Pisces. And so it was a way to commemorate that conjunction that is sometimes associated with the star of Bethlehem. You know, that idea of an omen showing a great, teacher. So, again, even though I tend to go with the first two, basically speaking, I think that it's whether they knew of it or not, it still had an influence. Now, what is the legacy of the Piscean age? And one of the things I want to try to convey here tonight is there's a tendency to look at this very simplistically. Is the Piscean age good or bad? My answer is yes. In other words, you tend to see a lot of ambiguity. You see a lot of good and bad both. It's not just one or the other. And this is true for anything in astrology. Take the sun sign Pisces, for example. On the one hand, you've got someone that embodies maybe the higher aspect of Pisces, like Michelangelo or Edgar Cayce, and then you've got John Wayne Gacy. That's Pisces. That's both sides of Pisces. Okay, it's the same sign, but different octaves of the same energy. So what I want to do here is first go through some of the basic symbols and then cover some of the higher and lower potentials of the sign. It's a water sign, so some astrologers like to talk about the fact that you've got this age of sea exploration, great sea exploration. But that's the exoteric symbol. What does water symbolize as a psychological factor? Emotions. So it's an age of heightened emotions, of sensitivity, and in Christianity, it also has to do with compassion. Pisces, like I said before, is that compassion for the outcast, for the dispossessed in society, a sense of love. There was a shift from an eye for an eye in the Aries age to turning the other cheek in the Pisces age. And I'm talking in generalities here. I hope you understand that, because the Aries age wasn't all pure Aries and the Piscean age wasn't all pure Pisces. There's a lot of complexities here. But another thing you see, well, this was how Joseph Campbell put it. In one of his books, he talked about, he came up with this palindrome, which expresses the shift from the Roman Empire, which really was the pinnacle of the Aries age, the Empire age, into the Piscean age, although he didn't talk in astrological terms, although he did know some astrology, from Rome out to Amor. And this expressed itself, too, in terms of a certain compassion for animals. In ancient times, I don't know how many of you know this, but in ancient times, religion was practically synonymous with animal sacrifice. And that basically started to change a few hundred years before Jesus. And it came to a head with Buddhism, Christianity, and what's the other one I'm forgetting? No, Islam is more complex, actually. It's very complex, their attitudes towards, Judaism. Because like with the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, that was like a turning point in Judaism in terms of, certain practices like this. And, yes, you still have, animal farming, and you still have people eating meat. But in terms of the connection to religion, basically starting with the Piscean age, you have this diminution of animal sacrifice. The ethos of charity and helping of the downtrodden. And that isn't just a Christian thing. That's also in Islam. You also see it in... And by the way, do you know what Islam means? Who knows what the word translates as? Surrender. Surrender, submission, which is a very Piscean sort of thing. That's not an Aries word, believe me. Are there any Aries in the room? I don't mean that as a... But you also see that sense of charity and kindness in the Buddhist tradition. The tradition of courtly love, the romanticizing of love, and the idealizing of the feminine, which arose in the late 11th century out of the cult of the Virgin. Very Piscean, that sense of that romantic sort of attitude towards love, which really hadn't existed before in any mass way. The other thing about Pisces is it's a